Back in 2023, a guy we'll call Daniel took a job as an overnight janitor at an old office building on the edge of town. It wasn't glamorous, mopping floors, emptying trash bins, wiping down desks, but it paid decently, and Daniel liked the solitude. The building was a relic from the 70s, all faded beige walls and flickering fluorescent lights. Most of the offices were empty, abandoned by companies that went under years ago. His shift started at midnight and ended at 6 a.m. He'd been doing it for about a month without issue, until one night something felt off. It was around 2 a.m., and Daniel was pushing his cart down the third-floor hallway. The air was stale, like always, and the hum of the lights was the only sound. Then he heard it, a faint tapping, like fingers drumming on glass. He stopped, looked around. Nothing. Just rows of dark, empty offices. He figured it was the building settling, maybe a pipe rattling. Old places like that make noises, right? He shook it off and kept moving, but the tapping didn't stop. It got louder, more insistent, coming from the office at the end of the hall, room 317. The door was closed, the blinds drawn, same as every night. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't supposed to go in there. It was one of the locked rooms management told him to skip. But curiosity got the better of him. He crept closer, the tapping growing frantic, almost desperate. When he reached the door, he pressed his ear against it. The sound stopped instantly. Silence. Dead, heavy silence. Then, a low, guttural groan, like something choking on its own breath. Daniel stumbled back, heart pounding. He grabbed his keys, fumbled with the lock, and swung the door open. The room was pitch black, the air thick with a sour, rotting smell. He flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. He pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and swept it across the room. At first, he thought it was empty, just dust-covered desks and stacks of moldy files. Then the beam caught something in the corner, a figure hunched over, sitting in an office chair. It was facing away from him, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, like its neck was broken. Long, stringy hair hung down its back, matted with something dark and wet. Daniel froze. "Hey," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You're not supposed to be here." The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. He took a step closer, the floor creaking under his boots. That's when he saw it, the hands. They were claw-like, nails long and jagged, digging into the armrest so hard the wood was splintered. And the tapping started again, slow and deliberate, coming from those hands. Tap, tap, tap. Daniel bolted. He didn't look back, didn't stop until he was outside in the parking lot, gasping for air. He called his supervisor, told him what happened. The guy laughed it off, said Daniel was imagining things, but agreed to check the footage from the hallway camera the next day. When they reviewed it, Daniel's blood ran cold. The tape showed him walking down the hall, stopping at room 317, opening the door, but the room was empty. No figure, no chair, nothing. Just Daniel, staring into the dark like a lunatic. He quit that night. But here's the worst part. A week later, he got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo, grainy, taken from above, like a security camera shot. It showed him standing in room 317, shining his flashlight into the corner. And there, clear as day, was the figure, its head now turned, staring right at him with hollow, blackened eyes. This next story comes from a woman named Sarah, who worked the night shift at a 24-hour gas station off a rural highway in late 2024. It was one of those lonely spots, nothing but fields and trees for miles, the kind of place where the only customers after midnight are truckers or lost travelers. Sarah didn't mind the quiet. She'd bring a book, sit behind the counter, and wait out the hours. But one night, the quiet turned into something else. It was around 3 a.m., and the store was dead. No cars, no sounds, just the buzz of the neon sign outside. Sarah was reading when she noticed a flicker on one of the security monitors, a grainy black and white feed from the pump cameras. She glanced up. At first, she thought it was a glitch. The screen showed Pump 4, but there was no car, no one there, just shadows. Then she saw it, a shape, tall and thin, standing perfectly still at the edge of the frame. She squinted, leaned closer. It looked like a person, but something was wrong. The arms were too long, hanging past the knees and the head. It was tilted, almost resting on its own shoulder. Sarah's stomach dropped. She checked the window. The pumps were empty, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the floodlights. No one was out there. She looked back at the monitor. The figure was gone. Relieved, she chalked it up to exhaustion. Maybe a trick of the light. But then the bell above the door jingled. She snapped her head up. No one came in. The store was still empty. Her pulse raced. She grabbed the phone, ready to call her manager when she heard it. A slow, wet dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. It was coming from the back room where the stock was kept. Sarah didn't want to look, but she had to. She grabbed a tire iron from under the counter and crept toward the door. The dragging stopped. She pushed it open, peering into the dark. The air was cold, unnaturally so, and it stank, like damp earth and decay. She flipped on the light. The room was a mess, boxes torn open, cans scattered like something had ripped through it. And in the far corner, scratched into the concrete floor, were words, "I see you." She ran back to the counter, locked the door, and called the cops. While she waited, she checked the monitors again. Every screen, every single one, showed the same thing. That figure, closer now, standing under the pumps, staring up at the cameras. Its face was a blur, but she could feel its eyes, like they were boring into her through the glass. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They found nothing. No figure, no tracks, just the wrecked stockroom and those words carved into the floor. They told Sarah it was probably a prank, some local kids messing with her. She didn't buy it. She quit the next day, moved out of state. But a month later, she got an email from an address she didn't recognize. No subject, no text, just an attachment. It was a photo, taken from outside the gas station that night. Through the window, she was behind the counter, staring at the monitors, and reflected in the glass behind her was that figure, its long arms reaching out inches from her back.